So, my name is Andrea Tolentino. Today is October the 10th of 2012, and I am interviewing Judith Forst, sorry. So, can you tell me how long you've been living in Coquitlam?
Well, I now live in Port Moody, but I was raised in Coquitlam, actually just down the street from this house in Fraser Mills, it was called when I was living there. And I lived there my whole life, really until I got married. Except I did stay in residence at UBC when I went for 2 years before I married.
So, what was it like growing up? What was your neighborhood like?
This neighborhood was very fascinating place because we were independent of Coquitlam. The Fraser Mills community all was, and you couldn't live in these houses unless your parent worked in the mill. And my dad did work in Fraser Mills, and he was a millwright there, and so we were allowed to rent a house. And we lived, when I was little, we lived in houses that were where the low-heat highway now runs and the freeway. That, of course, none of that was there, and there were houses closer to the river. And we were in a tiny little house there, and in 1948 there was a huge flood, and there are pictures of that flood upstairs. And all the sidewalks, which were wooden, all floated, and the water was up to, my dad was a tall fella, and he had to have hip waders. And in fact, we had to be evacuated. We were sent out to my mother's sister's place in Surrey for 2 or 3 weeks because you couldn't live in your house. You couldn't get out. And so then they had people in rowboats coming to take you out to where you could get into a car to go elsewhere. And then eventually my dad was given the opportunity for a bigger house, which was further up. There still wasn't a low-heat highway, but it was on what is now King Edward, and we were 113 King Edward Avenue. And now, of course, all those houses, except for this one and across, none of these were here. The ones further down now have it's all condominiums and a trailer park and a superstore and Canadian Tire, all of that, but our willow tree is still there. So it's down on the other side of King Edward, and where the park is now. The park runs all the way down, and when we lived there, the wooden sidewalks were on both sides of King Edward, and there was a back lane. And now King Edward is what was the back lane. So that's the change. And when we were little, my brother and all his friends, that was all just trees and wild. And they used to play out there every day after school and had a great time. But funny enough, the park that is just over here was still there, but you had to cut through to get up there. And he belonged to a little league team up there. So it was a great area to grow up in because everybody knew everybody. And you never locked your doors. People visited freely at the holiday time, at Christmas time. People went back and forth. Every night of the holiday week, I played the piano and sang as a kid growing up, and we'd have sing-songs around the piano every night of Christmas week. I mean, I see this old piano here, it reminds me of my old piano. And everyone was very friendly and visited all the time. And to this day, some of my friends were neighbors in Fraser Mills. And I grew up and moved to New York and lived there for a number of years, but then we came back and decided to raise our children in the area, and we chose to build a house just on the border of Port Moody and Coquitlam. So I'm still back in the area, although I travel all over the world.
It's really cool. So you said that you were kind of isolated from the rest of Coquitlam. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, because the housing was all dependent on the mill. Things like you rented your house, you didn't own it. And so it was quite interesting because every 4 years they redecorated it for you. This was all to do with the mill, and new wallpaper, new paint, everything was taken care of by the maintenance in the mill. And of course, you didn't have electric stoves. There was none of that. It was wood stoves with sawdust as the heat. We had an oil stove in the living room, an oil small heater. But in the kitchen, you cooked on a stove that had was fired by wood and sawdust. Did make, because the whole top, you see, was hot. And so you'd make great gravy, very good. But it was hard to regulate. And but when it came to going to school, you had to go to a school in Coquitlam. So elementary school for us was Millside, which is, we walked up King Edward and along Brunette to Millside School. And of course, when they closed the school, I went to the last event that they had there, and it was quite funny. My brother and I were remembering, having lots of remembrances in the school, because of course they had the stair going up, and when you were in grade 6, you got to stand there and ring the bell. And we knew exactly which was the principal's taught grade 6, and which was her room, and the back stairs where we used to stand in grade 3 and grade 2, and we'd have to go up the back stairs to go into the classroom every morning, and you'd wait. The teacher, I think Miss Wilson must have maybe been 18 years old when she was teaching us. And it was funny, she was very music oriented and knew as a child that I was, and became involved in my music over the years, and eventually she moved to Toronto, and when I would sing there with the Canadian Opera Company, she'd appear at my performances, which I thought was always interesting. And that's where we all went to elementary school, and then high school, we went to Coma Lake High School. That was the high school at that time. And they had junior high was the Winslow, which is now, I think, school board. And Coma Lake is the intermediate school now. But that was the high school. So needless to say, going up that hill was not funny. And so we managed to always get a ride because it was a bit hard going to go up that hill every morning.
So when you were living in Fraser Mills, where did you go shopping for groceries and for clothes and everything?
Into New Westminster. And the bus just came down and you would go into Westminster. When I was very young, you got on the interurban and you went into Vancouver. And then eventually in New Westminster at 6th and 6th, they had Woodward's, and every Friday night, my mom and dad would go and do their grocery shopping at Woodward's. And I had music lessons in Westminster, but I'd be driven to those, occasionally take the bus. But you would take it, the bus loop was down below us here. There was a spot where the bus came, and you took that into Westminster. And then transferred and went up to 8th or wherever your lesson was.
How was the bus service in Coquitlam? Was it really
good.
easy?
Well, it was for us because the bus stopped right across the street outside my door. So I just wait there and get on the bus.
Okay. You were saying about school that in like grade 6 you got to go and ring the bell and everything. Is there any other like little rituals that you did at school?
Well, from grade 1 to 6, there wasn't kindergarten at that point, but grade 1 to 6, it was you had the same friends right through. But everybody pretty much stayed the same. I can look at the pictures of the class picture every year and see the same group all the way through. And I have fond memories of the teachers, and there was a couple. The principal, when I was there, and for years and years and years, Doreen Kenmure, I always stayed in touch with her, and until just a year or so ago, I still would see her occasionally. And another, my grade 5 teacher, Helen Armour, I stayed in touch with her. And the classes maybe were 23, 4, not huge classes, but they drew, of course the students came from Fraser Mills, but don't forget they came from all around these streets. Now, of course, a lot of the students on the other side of Brunette went to either Our Lady of Lourdes School or Fatima, so the Catholic private schools. But the kids that didn't go to those schools then would go to Millside in this area. And you walked along, there used to be a store on the right side just down the way called Pets. And there was a store there, and then Trev's was across the street here. And they were just corner stores, you know, for milk and bread or emergencies.
So did you have a lot of friends that went to the Catholic private schools, or did you not really talk to them?
I met some of them in high school more. But they were in their own school, they had their own activities, and I never got to meet many of them. So we didn't interact a lot, no.
What about with other people from around Coquitlam, like on the other sides of Coquitlam? Did you talk a lot with those people?
Well, of course, if more in high school, you were in things with other students, and I was always involved in anything musical. I was involved in student council, in different clubs, and so of course you would interact. But you were dependent. There was no bus service going from here up there. The bus service went from Fraser Mills into Westminster. So if I was going to go to something at the school or any of my friends, I had to be driven. You couldn't just walk from here. But friends that I had in high school, I still hear from and will come to performances around that I give. And then one of my friends as a child who lived in the across the back from the first house I lived in. She lives now in Penticton, but we still are in touch all the time as childhood friends. So it was the relationships that you built were good, solid relationships, and you maintained them.
I want to ask you about the clubs and activities that you had at your school and in the community. Mm-hmm. What type of activities and clubs did you have?
Well, in the community, I don't know, because I was too busy, because I took a lot of music lessons, and so I had practicing before and after school. And I was also in high school a good student, because at that time, it depended on your marks, depended how much money you got from the government to go on to university, and I needed as much as I could get. And but within the school hours, I was always involved in high Y, student council, just whatever, not athletics. There was all kinds of athletics, but that wasn't what I involved myself with.
Was there a lot of athletics in the community?
No, I don't know. My brother played Little League. And of course, he played football for the high school. He was also in the band for the high school. So he did a little bit more than that. But at any of the sports activities just wasn't where my interest was.
Okay. Can you remember any really special events that you had while you were in high school?
Oh, everything seemed special. We put on musical theater. We did different, a piece that was written by one of the teachers there, and the other teacher wrote the text. Just whatever events that you did. I liked school, and I had good friends, and it was never hard for me to be in school. Like, you hear kids saying, I hate going to school, and the homework never bothered me. But then I liked, the only difficulty I ever had was with math, and I just wasn't very good at that. But I did well enough to get through. So, but I enjoyed my time in school.
Okay, going back to your community, and you were saying that at Christmas time people got around and they just visited each other. Can you tell me about maybe Christmas and some other holidays, how they were celebrated?
Um, I don't know. In the summer, of course, it was quieter, but we had very good friends that we would do activities together out of the community. You know, with Sundays, everybody'd pile into one car and off you'd go for the day at whatever location you were going to. Or we would frequently go down to Birch Bay and rent cottages side by side down there for a week or 2 weeks every summer, and I don't know, Sunday dinners, sometimes you would visit back and forth. There wasn't a lot of, nobody had a lot of money. So anything that was done things were done at home. My mom didn't work outside the home, and she sewed and she cooked, and everything was done from scratch because she had to make a dollar go as far as possible, and it was a different time. I think I was in grade 6 probably when we finally got television. My grandmother had a television, and I remember going to visit her in Burnaby where she lived, and it was quite an event on a Friday night to see television. But eventually we all got it, and things moved on, you know. But money, nobody had a lot of money, so everybody did simpler things. It was just a much simpler time.
What were some activities that you did before television, like for entertainment?
Oh, I don't know. Well, of course, as I said, during the week there was no time, and my dad had to work hard, so he was tired when he came home. He had to leave early to go to the mill. He was a volunteer on the fire department, so often in the middle of the night he'd be called to a fire, and we all knew the signals for where the fire was located in the mill by the number of whistles. If it was 2 short and 1 long, or 2 long and 3 short, and it would signify different areas of the mill. So sometimes sleep was disturbed through the night. You know, by the time you were at school in the morning to get the distance, whichever way you were going, and came home, and then I would have practicing to do, and so that the week was never an issue, and usually I had a lesson or something on Friday nights, so that was the end of that, and I always seemed to have a lot of homework, so the days went on the weekend, and you'd see people always out. They'd be talking over the fence, or just knock on the door, you know, if they wanted, or have a visit, or come in the back door. I don't remember anybody ever coming, well, maybe at the holidays they'd come in the front door, but they always used to come to the back door. It was just the way it was.
Were there a lot of French-speaking people here? Because I know.
Oh yes, in Millardville,
Yeah.
but not in Fraser Mills. Not so much.
Did you talk to a lot of French people though, or?
We didn't speak French. It was like this part of Fraser Mills was insulated. Then you had the Millardville area up to I don't know how far, Rochester or a little further, and that went across, you know, a couple of miles across, that encompassed Lady of Lourdes and Fatima, and then above that was all English again, and then at the all above Como Lake and Harbor Chines area and so forth, where a lot of my friends came to Como Lake from up there. There was certainly no French spoken there. So it was just this little community. And I'm so happy that today it's being, there's a commitment made to that area and to keep the French-speaking area. And of course, in Fraser Mills, we had a big Chinese community and a big East Indian community, which all who worked in the mill, and some of the Singhs, Bobby Singh, of course, Bobby I knew, and the Wongs, Art Wong was in my grade, Victor Jang was in my grade. Art Wong, we sometimes have a reunion of people from Fraser Mills, and I see Art Wong, and Doug Wong taught my kids at Banting, which I thought was quite funny. And I would see Doug quite often at Banting School when I would go. And of course, we were all in school at Millside together.
When you were in school, were there any special programs like advanced placement or anything?
No, you just advanced yourself by being the best you could be and made sure that you were at the top of your class. Yeah.
Were there any like community or community festivals or something? Like, I know the PNE was up in Vancouver, but was there any anything
Locally?
like that? Yeah.
Not that I remember. For many years at Halloween, down just for the Fraser Mill kids, they used to have a big room where they would do a Halloween party for the kids, and that I would have been about 8, my brother 4, or 6 and 2, and they did that a couple of years. But other than that, no, I don't remember anything like that. Now there are these different festivals, the Festival du Bois, and they do up at Blue Mountain Park every year, things like that. But we didn't have anything. No.
What about openings, like store openings or park openings?
Don't remember anything like that. No.
Is there one in there, the May Day Parade?
Yes, we had the May Day Parade every year. There used to be, I remember at Millside, we always had to do the maypole dances and practicing those till we were quite tired of them. And that would be done at Blue Mountain Park. So we had that, and that went on for a while. I think I really remember it through grade 6. And I think when I went up to Como Lake and Winslow, I think they still, but then you weren't part of it anymore. It was just elementary school. And it was all the local schools, Monday Park, Alderson Avenue, Austin Heights, and Millside. There may be 6 schools involved.
Okay. Can you tell me, you said your dad worked at Fraser Mills. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me anything that you know about his work?
Oh, he was a millwright, which meant he could fix anything that went wrong in the mill. And he started with the company when it was Fraser Mills, and then it was bought out by Crown Zellerbach and became part of a big business enterprise. And he worked there. Really, he had an early death. He had to take leave. He wasn't well, and but he really worked there his whole life, and it was a job that he could depend on. You see, he was in the union, and of course he was there before you were ever given a day off. He worked 7 days a week, and then the union, he was part of the union that fought to get a day off a week and to get paid holidays. If he took a holiday, he wasn't paid, but then he finally got paid holidays, and it's an amazing thing because he had a choice in later years about his pension, and he opted to take less money but to have his pension go through the length of either his or my mother's life, whoever lived longer. Well, he died when he was 62, and my mother lived until she was 92, and she had his pension all those years. That if he had opted, and it made a huge difference because she never worked, she had no pension. So that was something he fought for as a union member, and in those days, the union meant something very different to what it does today. And the union in those days paid holidays, a day off a week, certain hours of pay that they fought to be a living wage. It really meant a living wage at that time. Very different to what unions stand for today.
And your mom, she stayed at home, right?
She did, yes.
So did a lot of people stay at home?
They all did in our neighborhood. Yeah, nobody worked, and eventually, well, I wasn't at home anymore, but she did do a little bit of work in a photography studio for Woodwards because our neighbor was also doing hand coloring of photographs. And so she did a little bit of that, but no, my dad was the kindest, most gentle man, and but he didn't think it was appropriate that his wife work. And so they would do with less, and she stayed home. Different times.
You were saying that she was doing the photography work. Can you tell me about the technology, if you remember any of it, about the...
I don't. I just remember that there wasn't, they didn't use colored film. If you wanted a portrait in color, it was hand done. Quite beautiful, really. Very, very difficult to do, to get it right. But my mom, she was very, very good with her hands, and she sewed. And in fact, until she was unable, she sewed all my concert gowns. And so and not trained, you see, she wasn't trained to do it. She learned from her mother how to sew, and she was meticulous, and so she could make beautiful gowns. And she did that and loved doing that. But or she would take things boxes of clothes that would come from cousins and alter them to fit me. And so I was always quite well dressed when you think of the money that was in the house. But it was just because she sewed.
Did a lot of people have training in, like formal training in sewing?
No, people did knit and sew, and everybody cooked. You know, you didn't go and buy a package of cookies. You baked. That was the way you do it. And it's funny enough, I do to this day. Very seldom would I think to buy baking. That just doesn't seem right to me. You make it. And I'll never forget the first time that we got an electric, like a pop-up toaster. And I think we went through 2 loaves of bread, sliced bread, because it was the most amazing thing to see that all happen. But it was, you look back and you think, well, how did you do that when you see the kids needing so much today? Well, there wasn't, my dad was paid every 2 weeks, and that money lasted 2 weeks. And you did. Now, I was given music lessons, but then, of course, he didn't do anything for himself if I had a music lesson. That was his choice, to look after his children.
Did you or anyone you know in high school get a job for...
I did know people that did, yes. I did not. I was able to earn a little bit of money with my singing. With the odd, I used to sing for different things that were going on, and then on my way to university, I went and did a show at Harrison Hot Springs Hotel and made enough to pay for my clothing, and then I got enough in scholarship to pay for my tuition. I did live at home when I first went to UBC, and carpooled and drove to UBC, which was quite a thing. But being in the music school and being in a show, it was very difficult, so I did end up living out there partway through my first year, and then the second year I stayed out there because it was just too far to travel, and I wasn't getting enough practicing. When you're in the music school, you have all these courses and things you have to do, but you have to practice 2 to 3 hours a day also. But when you're on the road for almost 2 hours every going and coming, the practicing was very hard to fit in. So I just found ways to pay, and I took student loans and paid it all back.
Was it easy to get a carpool?
It seemed the years that I needed to, I was able to do it. There was enough of us. And one of the fellas had a car, and we just paid him, what did we pay him, $5 or $10 a week? I think it was enough for the gas, which would get me from here to maybe Sapperton today. I don't know. Different time.
What were the cars like? Were they really big?
Well, we had a different car. I remember in our house, Studebaker, and then we had a green, two-tone green Chev. Those are the cars that I remember. And then, of course, once I was married, we had a blue Volkswagen, a little Beetle, and then a red one, and that we used to drive across Canada to New York in. So that car had quite the journey.
When you were growing up, what kind of chores did you have to do?
Through the week, I wasn't asked to do anything. On the weekends, sometimes I'd be asked to dust or do things like that. My brother had to help fill the sawdust buckets, and it was pretty hard when it was frozen, as he'll remember. A few things like that, but we weren't asked to do an awful lot.
The house that you lived in, was it, you mentioned that it had a wooden stove?
The stove burned fuel, yeah, wood, and then attached to the side was a place that you had an extension, and you poured sawdust in, buckets of sawdust like this, and that's what kept it going.
Did you get the sawdust from the mill?
That was delivered from the mill, yeah, yeah.
Are there any popular trends that you remember growing up or when you were a teenager or anything?
Oh, crinolines, big full skirts. That was pretty important. I remember we went through probably quite nasty when we all had to have these white jackets with, like an outer jacket with a zipper, and white buck shoes. We had those. Of course, the pedal pushers came in at that time, and then they went out. Now, of course, capris are all over the place. And what else? Oh, the hair was good. The hair, lots of hairstyles through high school.
What about music?
We loved dancing, and every Saturday night somebody'd have a house party, and we did lots of dancing.
Was there school dances?
Yep, we had school dances. Maybe 4 a year in the gym.
Did you have a big prom, like?
We did have something at the school for grade 12, and then we went in my case, it was the Vancouver Hotel up at the roof. That was where the big party was. Yeah.
Do you remember any really significant world events that kind of impacted everyone?
Of course, one of the biggest things in my school years was when I was in university, when Kennedy was shot. That was a huge, momentous event. Not so much before then, and of course, I remember when, well, was living in New York and was back here in the summer, and that was when they landed on the moon, and that was something you couldn't believe was happening. So some things like that, but not huge events like that so much.
How did the community in general react to the two big events that you mentioned there?
Well, I don't know regarding, I mean, the papers, of course, with the moon landing and news media, everything, that was all that was talked about. And as far as when Kennedy was killed, I was at UBC, and the class was dismissed, and it was unbelievable that could have happened. Everybody was very shocked.
What was the biggest way to get news? Was it an actual newspaper, or was it TV or radio?
No, newspaper, of course, radio were the two things.
Did everyone have a radio?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, everybody did. Yeah.
What kind of things played in it?
I remember music, of course. Funnily enough, years before that, my grandmother, my dad's mother, always used to listen to the Metropolitan Opera broadcast, which happened every Saturday afternoon, and it always was quite moving to me. That was very much part of her life. And then I've done many of those broadcasts since, and to think that was such an important part of her life. But we didn't listen to it much at home. That wasn't part of our life growing up. I remember my mom and dad, there was some different stories that they would listen to on the radio, I think. Of course, CKNW was always listened to. And then the funny part of that was that I married into a family that the main man for the morning show was Frosty Forst, who was my brother-in-law. So that was kind of a funny connection with CKNW.
Once people started getting TVs, did everyone stop listening to the radio, or did people still listen to the radio?
I think because the radio was in your car, and so the radio was always part of people's life, and I think it still is, in a way, you know. Mind you, now everybody's into Sirius radio, and they have that in their cars now, and so they get whatever they want. But I don't think we've lost the radio yet.
What about the radio shows that you mentioned? Were they less popular as people got TVs?
I suspect yes. All those shows disappeared. Yeah.
And then what type of things played on the TV? Do you?
Well, I wasn't allowed to watch a lot of it, but the one show well, there was a couple that every Sunday night at 8 o'clock, Ed Sullivan Show. Everybody watched the Ed Sullivan Show. And there was one on Friday nights called Dragnet that everybody seemed to watch that. There's probably a few others, but we weren't allowed to watch that much television. The only sports that every Saturday night at Hockey Night in Canada was in our house. My dad loved it, and I loved it, and my brother loved it. My mom couldn't, she didn't care about it at all. But we always sat and probably have a hamburger and watched Hockey Night in Canada. That was a big deal.
Was it a big deal for other people? Like, did a lot of people like?
Different ones that we knew did, yes. Yeah, but it just was in our house, important. And it's important to my house to this day. Not this season, however, so far.
Oh, have to throw it out there while you're there. 72? The Canadian hockey series in Russia, did that have any impact?
No, not so much. I was 68. Yeah, I was living in New York then. Yeah.
We're at 42 minutes, just so you know, for 2 more minutes.
Okay. Are there any other really big memories you have of Coquitlam that you wanna?
No, it just seemed our growing up was relatively easy, and when we moved back here and we looked around and then decided, well, of course it helped that my mother and dad lived in, they had moved from Fraser Mills up into Coquitlam in another area, and but when we built the house, we came back, and our children were raised in Port Moody. They went to College Park, and then they went to Banting and Coquitlam, and then they went to Moody Senior, and it was, well, they also went to Seaview for a couple of years, but it was an easier place to live for them. It was, they could walk to school with no difficulties. At that time, it wasn't as busy when we came back. Now, of course, it's extremely busy, and people are looking for properties all the time because it's close to the city. It's much closer than moving to Maple Ridge and so forth. So it wouldn't be as ideal as it was before.
Was Coquitlam considered close to the city back when you were?
No, my goodness me. I took a piano lesson in Vancouver once a week, and there was no freeway. We drove along the Lougheed Highway, and people thought my dad was nuts taking me, but that was where the best teacher was, and so I was taken for this lesson. And that was a journey to do that every week.
Okay. How did you meet?
Well, I'm married to Graham Forst, and I can't remember quite how long we've been married, but it's close to 50 years. It's a long time. I was a student at UBC, and one of the requirements in my course was choir. And he was a student at UBC, but he was going to go to Berkeley to study philosophy. But he had friends in the music school, and they needed more men to be in the choir, so he came along and we met in the choir. And so that was that. He did go, he traveled to Europe, and he came back, and he had studied at UBC doing a degree in English literature. And he was doing a master's. I was in my third year going into fourth when we married, and then I was chosen to, I was given a job at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City, so he was all over moving to New York, and we drove, and he took a position in New York with the universities there and did a doctorate while there in literature, and from UBC. And then eventually we had one child, and the question was in New York, do we move to a bigger apartment, move to New Jersey, or move back here where our family was? And so we moved back here, and Graham was one of I think he was the first or second year at Capilano College, which is now Capilano University. So he taught there, and we moved back. And so our children, our second child, was born the year that we moved back here, and they got to know their grandparents. So that was a good thing. And I worked from here all over wherever my singing took me, and he taught at Capilano University. So that's how that went.
Did you live close to your parents?
Yes, well, Graham's family lived in Vancouver, but my mom and dad lived in Harbour Chines at that point, and so my mother often would look after my children when they were preschool while I would be away singing, or she would bring them to where I was singing. And of course, in the summers, when the whole family could come, Graham brought the kids, and so they have had summers in Ottawa, summers in New York City, summers in Santa Fe, summers in, all over the place. So they've had an interesting upbringing. In fact, to this day, and my daughter lives in Toronto now and is she's with the Lightbox Theatre there, which is the Toronto Film Festival headquarters, and is a manager and production manager for them. And my son lives in Vancouver and has 2 little girls. But it's a funny thing how they still think I'm supposed to bring all of them wherever I work. So they're still traveling.
What about your brother? Did he move back to Coquitlam?
No, he didn't. He lives in North Vancouver. He lived briefly in Vancouver when after university, and he married, and he and his wife Lynn have 2 boys, and they live in North Van. But of course, he's at my house often, and so is in the area frequently. But our neighbors, the Valences, who live next door to us in Fraser Mills, still live. Ray is 94, and she lives in Coquitlam on Shaw. And who else? No, John Dixon, who was our other neighbor. Now he's down in the White Rock area, so he didn't stay in the area. But there's a few of us. I run into the odd person once in a while in the Safeway or in some of the stores. Helen Holmes, who was a neighbor in Fraser Mills, and is the person that she and her brother Bob Holmes, for years and years, in their Burnaby home, had the reunion of her friends. They were a few years ahead of me, but they used to babysit for me when I was little, and so she's gathered everybody, and I believe they did it again in Blue Mountain Park this summer, and I don't know whether I was teaching in Banff or I was away and wasn't able to join them, but it's nice to connect with some of the people that, in fact, one of the people that was a neighbor 2 doors down, her name was Olive Stewart, and she was very involved in the school district 43, and she was in her 90s, and she just passed away this year, and so she would be always at these gatherings, and so you can see the community that we had, that people still want to be in touch.
A few minutes left, maybe a bit about your recollections of this house we're actually in today.
Mm-hmm. This house and the one across the street, one was the Ewert's house, which, you see, this would have been the Gelbottens' house, and the Ewert's house is the one that Place des Arts is now in. And King Edward Avenue went down the middle. Now King Edward Avenue goes down the back lane. So I wasn't in this house too much. I was in the Ewert's house more often. But these houses were significant houses, and to live in either of these houses, you had to be a manager in the mill. And so they were all, it was considered a little bit grander than the rest of the houses. But they're beautiful old homes, and just have been here for years and years and years, and part of the community.
Did you know the people who lived in this?
Yes, I did, yeah. The Gelbottens, Annabelle was older than I was, and when I came in this house today, I was interested to see a a little display of Barbara Ann Scott dolls, and I always think of Annabelle Gilbachen, who lived in this house, and her mum had Annabelle doing skating lessons, and Annabelle didn't have the physique for skating lessons, and so her mum made her put her skates on and put the guards on and walk around on the wooden sidewalks to strengthen her ankles. But I don't think it was too successful. And then in the Ewert's house across the street, there was just boys in that house. So we certainly knew Ina and Mac Ewert. That was people we knew, but the kids, I didn't play with them so much because they were a little bit older and boys.
Even though the people in this house were managers, did the family still talk to?
Oh, sure, they talked. They did, but they never visited as much with us back and forth as the other ones did. And it wasn't everybody that did, although everybody knew everybody, but there was, the Dixons and the Johnsons and the Valences, and my friend Carol Roel was across the street, and the Thompsons, and they were the ones that always went back and forth and had all the visiting.
Were there some people that weren't very close to?
There were people that we didn't know as well as others. There were people that were like family. The Dixons, the Valences, and the Harts were as much part of our family as blood relatives. The other people we knew very well, but we weren't as close. It's the same as life today. There's always families that are closer.
It must have been nice though, living so close to them, because you could visit them.
It was always good times, and we have remained friends to this day.
Good. Yeah, I think we're done.
Good.
Yay.
Thank you.